What is going on, gunfighters? Saddle up for another episode of Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting the right way, with God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. Gonna try something new here. Instead of doing a full bio in the beginning, I'm gonna maybe mention a few things germane to today's topic, and I'll put the full bio in at the end. See if it does any better. Maybe you like the format better, maybe you don't. Trying to do better for you guys and improve the podcast. So on today's topic, Western big game rifles. Western states I have lived in: California, Idaho, Nevada, Arizona, and I should say I've lived in Idaho several times, both southern and northern Idaho. I've been blessed to be a professional big game hunter and guide, and I've won more than a few rifle competitions. With that, big game Western hunting rifles. And I'm going to have to caveat this by saying the West is a vast, vast place. This does not apply to everywhere out west. If you're hunting the coastal Pacific Northwest, black-tailed deer, far different environment to what I think generally people think about when they talk about Western hunting, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. Likewise, the Sonoran Desert. If you're hunting the Sonoran Desert for javelina, mule deer, and pronghorn, a 25-06 of 243 is right on the money for that. That's not really what I'm talking about when you generally mention Western hunting today. Conjures up, I think, in the imagination of people that have never been there, something akin to Hell's Canyon, mule deer, or sawtooth, or river of no return wilderness type areas for mule deer, elk, bear, sheep, things like that. Let's talk about top picks for Western big game rifles. When I left being the commander of a tactical team, I was very blessed and humbled by the team. They pitched in and got me a Browning AB3 good rifle in 7mm Remington Magnum, because one of the guys had recently asked me, what's a good all-around kind of Western hunting cartridge? And I answered him, assuming he was asking for himself, and I said the 7mm Rem Mag. It's undisputed. It'll kill anything. It's great. It's renowned for its ability to take mule deer and elk. It's got a good reputation for that for good reason. So they got me a Browning A-Bolt 3 and 7mm Rem Mag when I left, and I was very humbled by that. That would be a good choice, the Browning A-Bolt 3 and 7mm Rem Mag. My go-to rifle, and I did a whole episode, it's been a while now, but it's called a guide's rifle. I was professionally guiding. A Kimber Adirondack and 6.5 Creedmoor was my companion most of the time. It's light, it's handy, and if you have the discipline to hold your shots to acceptable ones, 6.5 Creedmoor can be okay. I don't think it's optimal. I think for me it was a good choice, but for a generality, I don't think it's the best. If I were choosing today, and I was picking a rifle to hunt the West, period, going to me like my one go-to rifle, I think I would pick a Kimber still, but a Mountain Ascent and 280 Ackley Improved. 280 Ackley Improved has been around for decades, but I don't think it's been appreciated until recently. The 280 AI is, in my opinion, probably the most well-balanced and capable and efficient Western hunting cartridge, period. Years ago, it was fairly obscure. I think right around on the level with 6.5 284. I think just, not even through marketing, but through sheer wisdom and a lot of really knowledgeable people hunting hard with that cartridge, just become more popular to the point where I would consider it for a go-to hunting rifle. The 280 Ackley Improved is beautiful. If you don't know, the 30-06, probably the most well-balanced and versatile rifle cartridge, period. I didn't say best for Western hunting, I said best all-around, most versatile, 30-06. Back in the 20s, if memory serves correctly, they necked that down to 2.7. .27 caliber. The .270 Winchester is a legendary Western hunting cartridge. The .280 is taking that same 30-06 case and necking it down to .28 caliber or 7mm. They're congruent there. They're just different ways to measure it. But 7mm and .28 caliber, just different ways to designate the same thing. So they neck it down to 7mm. 7mm is a beautiful kind of all-around Western hunting caliber. I mentioned the 7mm Rem Mag to start. Well, that just neck down is just a regular old .280. It's a good round in and of its own right. If you're not familiar with P.O. Ackley, he did a lot to make cartridges more efficient. The 30-06 was designed as a military cartridge, designed to be extracted well. It's got a nice taper on it for nasty, hot machine gun chambers or semi-automatic M1 Grands. It's great for that. You don't really need that in a good bolt-action rifle. And you can optimize that by giving it less taper and a more optimized shoulder, giving it a little bit more capacity. And that's what the .280 Ackley Improved is. Forgive me if you already know this. But many don't, and it's a super efficient cartridge. I mentioned the 7mm Rem Mag. 7mm Rem Mag is a little bit faster, but it uses a lot more powder to achieve that little bit more velocity. And ejectamass, the amount of powder, also contributes to recoil. Getting a lot more ejectamass, a lot more powder burned for a little bit more velocity. It's a more powerful cartridge, but it's far less efficient. It's going to have more recoil. And a light, handy mountain rifle, I'd rather have the .280 Ackley Improved. And the way that I like to hunt, hard hunting in steep, nasty terrain, that Kimber Mountain Ascent, I want to say, is right around 5 pounds. And that and a .280 Ackley Improved, I think, would be the most optimal choice. Kimber Mountain Ascents are not cheap rifles. They are not ridiculously expensive rifles either. They're not in the league of like a Gunworks rifle or something like that. And those are fine rifles. They're just much more affordable than that. They have an MOA accuracy guarantee. Real world mountain kind of hunting, shooting off a pack, shooting from the kneeling, shooting from the standing. They're a good, accurate, lightweight hunting rifle. There are a lot of really good rifle options out there for Western hunting. The reason I mentioned the Kimber is, in my opinion, it was based on the best rifle action, the Pre-64 Winchester controlled round feed. And taking advantage of modern metallurgy, it's quite a bit smaller and sleeker than the original, while being very strong. One of the reasons these rifles are so light and handy. The weight, the controlled round feed, I really like that. Most modern hunting rifles, I think, and mostly an effort to cut costs, are push feed. Now, to be fair, push feeds have proven themselves. Plenty of hunters use push feeds. I like controlled round feed. I like the quiet chambering of the rounds. I like the controlled feed. I like that extractor grabbing that round when it comes off the magazine and being guided into that chamber and extracted. The positive grip, that entire motion. For some of you, that you may not care at all about that. Those are some reasons I like the Kimber rifle. It comes in other calibers, but if you want my opinion on the best setup, if I was buying one right now for all around Western hunting, I would get a Kimber Mountain Ascent and .280 Ackley Improved. Some other honorable mentions. I mentioned that Pre-64 Winchester. For a while, they went to push feed to save costs, but now they're back to the original controlled round feed. Sadly, the Winchester rifles are not made in America anymore, but they're still a good rifle. They are still a good rifle. They make a couple of different versions, and they make it in a really cool classic cartridge. Did a whole episode on it. The 264 Win Mag. It is a Magnum. I'm not the biggest fan of Magnums. I think they're more than is necessary. They're a bit superfluous for a lot of game. But the 264 Win Mag is a good choice. I will concede that. I mentioned the 7mm Rem Mag. You can surely get one in that. But since the Winchester cartridge, I looked and they still, last I checked, made brand new Winchester Model 70s, controlled round feed, and 264 Win Mag. Especially if you wanted to go more classic, like blued steel, walnut. Who cares much about the appearance and class of the rifle as you do about the performance. You might want to get one of those more traditional looking rifles, and Winchester is a proven name, and this cartridge, if I remember correctly, came out in the 50s. And if you look at the ballistics of a 264 Win Mag, it's pretty awesome. Got a bad reputation for barrel burnout, but let's be honest. How many rounds of 264 Win Mag are you going to shoot through that rifle? No, it's not a belt fed, it's a bolt action hunting rifle. Those Winchesters do weigh a little bit more, so I don't think it would be unmanageable for an average, let's say size and experience level Eastern hunter to adapt to that for Western hunting. That Winchester Model 70 and 264 Win Mag, solid choice. Browning rifles. I mentioned that Browning AB3. It's a fine rifle. It's more on the budget end, and it's still a really good rifle. So if you want that Browning name affordably, a working man's rifle, it's a good choice. Good value. If you want to go a little bit more fancier, you want something really cool with some Cerakote and some Gucci camo, they make the higher end models, the Browning. Well, let me look them up and give you some good models of the Brownings. I think they're a good option. Now, Browning makes one called the Western Hunter. So, there you go. It's a good looking rifle. It's what I was imagining. Cerakote, some Gucci flage on there. It comes in a menagerie of different calibers. 280 Ackley improved. I mean, I talked about the merits of that caliber. They also make it in 7mm Rem Mag and the 28 Nosler. 28 Nosler is a solid choice. This is called the Western Hunter, but I wouldn't consider it a light rifle. It's 7 pounds, 4 ounces. And if you're thinking that's not a big deal, if you've ever covered, thousands of feet of elevation change and not 100 yards getting to your tree stand like you might back east, but miles and miles and miles, 10, 12, 20 miles in a day, out west is big country. 7 pounds is not a light rifle. It really depends on how you're going to hunt. But that Western Hunter, if you're going to carry a rifle that heavy, 28 Nosler might not be a bad one. If you're erring on the side of I want to make sure I have enough gun, 28 Nosler. The way I think of it is kind of a newer, beefier 7mm Rem Mag without a belt. Although it doesn't have Western anywhere in the name, I would probably go with their stainless Stalker. I clicked on that one. I just picked 7mm Rem Mag, and it weighs 6 pounds, 13 ounces, so a little bit lighter. So if you're into Browning, you may want to look at that stainless Stalker. It's got a more classic look if you consider stainless classic. I like that rifle. Nothing wrong with it. That and 7 Rem Mag would be a good choice. We haven't mentioned it yet, but the WSMs, the Winchester Short Mags. It's available in 270 and 300 WSM. 270 WSM is a decent choice. I think 7mm is more versatile, but if you really love that 270, they make it in traditional 270. You want it in the 270 WSM, it's worth a mention. I would gear more towards the 7mm, but it's definitely an option. The 270 has definitely taken plenty of elk. So I guess that's a good place to segue into. A lot of people make these elk out to be Abrams tanks. A lot of really experienced Western hunters that I know don't feel the need to have a 300 Win Mag on elk, and I don't either. I don't own a 300 Win Mag. I have no desire, shy of going to Alaska, having something like that. I have put more animals in the dirt by God's grace than I can remember, and I have no desire for a 300 Win Mag. I professionally hunted buffalo. I have no desire for a 300 Win Mag. The recoil is not worth the trade-off of me being able to shoot that quickly, handily, and be able to practice with it without punishing myself. I think a lot of people will think these elk need a lot more killing than they do. If you have good shot placement, I think it's more than is necessary. And if you have crappy shot placement, it rarely makes a difference. I once was on a professional hunt, a sheep hunt. I watched a guy do just a bad shot. And it was even a fairly close shot with, I think, a 300 Win Mag, if memory serves correctly. Close distance. Well, that sheep started running away, and I took an offhand shot, by God's grace. My guide's rifle, 6.5 Creedmoor, light handy little Kimber Adirondack, and dropped that sheep in his tracks at 183 yards. I think I went back and range found it. That ram, and he was a big one. He was Oscar Mike. He was on the move. Dropped him with that 6.5 Creedmoor, 120-something grain bullet. When that 300 Win Mag failed to at a closer distance. Why? Shot placement. If you gut shoot an animal, gut shooting with a 300 Win Mag is no better. I think a lot of people romanticize and lionize these animals to make them something they're not. You want to hunt elk with a 300 Win Mag, it's a free country, you certainly can, and many people do. Many people also hunt them, and I have, and been very successful with a 243. I will give up some range for that, and I will give up some shot opportunities for that. I will take some shot angles, bigger calibers that I wouldn't take with a 243. But that being said, don't turn these animals into Cape Buffalo. They're not that. I am very blessed to be one of the few modern people that has professionally hunted buffalo. Not Cape Buffalo, but our American bison. And I don't own a rifle caliber bigger right now than .308. That being said, a 300 Wisdom or a 300 Win Mag will certainly drop an elk. But make sure you can shoot it and handle it well, and be honest with yourself. So that Browning stainless stalker, and I mentioned the 7mm Rem Mag, it's still a Magnum, it's still plenty powerful, I think more than powerful enough, and it's going to give you less recoil. And sometimes just as respectable sectional density as the 300 Win Mag. I'd say look at that one if you do want the Magnum. If you want to make sure you have enough gun. The 7mm Rem Mag, nobody's going to argue that's not enough gun. Well, very few people are going to argue. Somebody would always argue you need a 375 H&H or something. Or a 35 Whalen, which is a good caliber. But it's, I think, more than it is necessary. Now let's talk about some budget options. If you've listened for any length of time, you'll know that I am a big fan of the Savage Axis rifle. Everyone I've ever had has been crazy accurate. Like if I had spent way more, actually I may not want to admit this, but they may actually be more accurate than my Kimber go-to hunting rifles. And there's more to a rifle than accuracy, but you talk accuracy, every Savage Axis that I've ever had has had accuracy in abundance. And they're affordable, and I'm not going to knock them for being affordable, and they're available in stainless. MSRP on their website is $419, and real world price is likely going to be far less than that. It's available in .308. Do I think that's an optimal Western hunting cartridge? No, but remember this is a budget option. It's also available in a cartridge we haven't talked about yet, 7mm .08. If I'm being honest, and I don't own one, but if I'm being honest, just like the 280 is probably better than the 30-06 for Western hunting, I think the 7mm .08 is probably a better Western hunting cartridge than the 308. It's also available in that classic 270 that has been putting elk in the dirt for decades and decades. Jack O'Connor didn't certainly think he was undergunned with it. And bullet technology and bullet construction is even better today, which is probably its own podcast episode on bullet construction for these type of animals. But bullet construction is way better today than it was in the 1920s. Contrary to what gun marketing and hype would have you believe, these elk and mule deer have not been taking steroids. They've not been juicing. They're not taxonomically really any different than they were 100 years ago. The Savage Axis XP Stainless is a little bit more money. The MSRP they have listed at the time of this recording is $569. Again, real world price is likely lower than that. If you can spring for the stainless, in my opinion, if you can get stainless, get stainless. Some people don't agree with that, but to me, a blued gun is a depreciating asset. Anyway, they make it in stainless, they make it in the same calibers, a good, solid budget option. And the Savage Model 10s and 110s are awesome as well. There's a lot of really, really good options in bolt action rifles. I'm listing a few that I would go to. I stepped down from other jobs to be giving more dedication and time to this podcast, which I hope you appreciate. If you do, please consider becoming a patron. If I was still professionally guiding and somebody came to me, one of the patrons recently did, these are some suggestions that come to mind. Again, the number one, if I was picking for me right now, if I was starting over and I was going to professionally hunt and guide again out west, I'd pick that Kimber Mountain Ascent in 280 Ackley improved. If the guy said I want something a little bit more traditional, I'd probably recommend that Winchester Model 70. And since it's a heavier rifle, I might go with a little bit bigger caliber. If they cared about that, they probably want a classic cartridge, that 264 Win Mag. Been a powerhouse since the 50s. One of the few Magnums I really have an affinity for, I think. I choose that, and a budget option, the Savage Axis. Again, every one I've ever had has been crazy accurate. And here's the thing, everybody loves to talk about gear, and I have a whole podcast on gear. But if you didn't fill your elk tag with a Savage Axis and 270, let's be honest, it's probably your fieldcraft and experience that's lacking. Not that you didn't have enough caliber or a fancier, more expensive rifle. I'm all about fancy, nice rifles. I'm all about fancy, nice handguns. I'm just saying, let's be real. Fieldcraft plays a far bigger role. Being able to walk quiet in the woods is going to play a far bigger impact on whether you fill your tag or not versus 270 versus 300 Win Mag. With that, I hope you enjoy this episode. I'm going to plug in the bio after the tactical verse of the day. Hopefully you appreciate the tactical verse of the day. I don't want you to miss out on that. And then after that, if you don't want to listen to the bio, you can just end the podcast. You'll miss out on the tactical tip at the end, but hey, I know not everybody wants to listen to the bio all the time, and I get that. But I also realize that hopefully, by God's grace, new listeners come in all the time. The tactical verse of the day. Let us also get rid of every weight and entangling sin. Let us run with endurance the race set before us. I've been blessed to be in many wild places and have great hunts by God's grace. But let us not forget what's really important, our final destination, and keep God at the center of our lives. So, who am I? Who is this person talking to you from across the internet? Why should you listen? First and foremost, I am a Christian, a servant of God, and a follower of Jesus Christ. God has blessed me to do many things in my life, for I could do nothing apart from Him. U.S. Marine Corps combat veteran, did a couple of tours in Iraq. As an assaultman after my combat tours, I was an urban warfare instructor for the Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. Also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. Also did several years in law enforcement, LAPD. I worked regular assignments and more specialized assignments. Been a private contractor for a 3-letter government agency. That's all I'll say about that. Been blessed to be a state rifle and pistol champion and West Coast Regional Rifle Champion. Won more shooting competitions with the talent that God's given me than I can actually remember. Was blessed to be the commander of a tactical team in a large metropolitan area. Our primary job, the reason we primarily existed, was to stop active shooters. I got the opportunity to head up and be the commander of that team. I grew up around guns, hunting and shooting and competing at a very early age. Been blessed to hunt all over this beautiful country, from whitetail on the East Coast to mule deer on the West Coast, and bear and elk and all manner of things. I've even been a professional big game hunter and guide. But again, most importantly, I'm a Christian. And I am your host, Michael Melito. Welcome to the podcast. Alright, if you listen till the end, a sincere thank you. I am humbled that you spend some time here with me. As a thank you, the tactical tip of the day. If you've listened for any length of time, you'll know I'm big on getting a .22 handgun to train and be a master of pistol craft. Well, you can do a similar thing with hunting and a .22 rifle, obviously. I encourage you to get out with your hunting rifle after you shoot it on a bench. So many hunters just shoot it off the bench and go hunting. Take your hunting rifle and practice some shots from a kneeling position, from a sitting position, from a standing position, with a hasty sling, knowing how to brace off a vertical tree trunk, knowing how to get in a good prone position and realize what's a good prone position and what's not a good prone position. But after you've trained a little bit with that center fire rifle, now maybe you can see why I'm not a big fan of the 300 Win Mag. But after you've done a little bit of that training to save money, to fine-tune those fundamentals, grab a .22. Put a steel target out at 100 yards. Practice your shots from the standing, from the kneeling, from the prone. The fundamentals will transfer. And it's a lot more feasible for most people and economical to do that with a .22 and a brick of 500 rounds than it is with a 7mm Rem mag, or even a .308. .308 is fairly affordable ammo for centerfire ammo. One of the reasons I have one for hunting, because it's the best all-around caliber, because the ammo is affordable and I can get it at Walmart, literally. But it's still a lot more economical to train with that 22, so get that 22. Train with it. Again, put a sling on it. Shoot with a sling. Practice not just shooting from a kneeling position, but getting into a kneeling position and shooting. Knowing when you're going to hit the target and when you're not. There's nothing wrong with missing if you learn something. But knowing when not to shoot is one of the marks of a great hunter. As a guide, I have far more respect for a man who doesn't take a shot he doesn't think or believe that he can take. Just somebody lobbing rounds down range at animal. All to be good stewards. I'm all about slaying beasts and eating them. I'm also not for having an animal suffer when it doesn't need to. I have a lot of respect for a hunter that knows the shots he can take and the shots he reasonably shouldn't take and doesn't take them. I have a lot of respect for that man. You'll have a lot better judgment in that scenario if you've done that. Repetition, sets and reps, right? Have you gotten quite a bit of practice getting into a kneeling position with a hasty sling and making a shot? Anyway, that 22 is a great training tool for that. Also a fun thing to do, go out in some fairly uneven terrain and things like that. Make sure you pick up your trash when you're done, but one of those old Folgers coffee cans. Setting that out at 100 or 200 yards. A fairly big metal object like that, because it gives you audible and visual feedback. You can usually see when you hit it with a 22, even at 200 yards, or hear it. Sounds different than landing in the sand or the dirt. And it can be, honestly, a lot of fun. So that's your tactical tip of the day. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you saw some value in this and you want to help, there'll be a Patreon link in the show notes. Also, if you'd like to help another way, I find myself now in Central Florida, and I'm having a time finding a place where I can do what I would call practical shooting. Drawing from the holster, shooting a rifle not on a bench. Public land out here is not just open for shooting the way it is out west. If you have some private land or access to some private land somewhere in Central Florida, I can go and I'll be a good steward and pick up my trash and all that stuff. If you have somewhere where I can go shoot and train, that would be greatly appreciated. So if you are a listener and you want to support, but you don't want to support on Patreon, that would be a great blessing. If you had somewhere in Central Florida, safe to shoot outside city limits where I could go and train, I'd be very humbled by that. Just thought I'd throw that out there. Thanks for listening, men, and have a blessed day.